Welcome to our deep dive into the life and philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi. I'm excited to explore his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth. To uncover some surprising sides to this person everyone knows so well.
Yeah,
We're going beyond that typical image of him as just a political leader and dig into the personal things that really made him who he was.
right. Gandhi's autobiography is so candid, even funny sometimes.
Oh, really?
He doesn't shy away from his flaws and his struggles, which makes his journey so relatable,
Hmm.
you know?
It seems kind of counterintuitive, though. You'd think someone so revered would only want to present the perfect version of themselves. But Gandhi's willingness to expose those imperfections, that's what really draws you in.
Yeah, it's a testament to his whole philosophy, constantly improving himself, striving for truth and authenticity. He really saw his whole life as a series of experiments,
Mm.
always learning and growing.
So let's start at the beginning. His childhood. Gandhi was born in 1869 in Porbandar, India,
Mm-hmm.
during British rule. His family was well off, but that didn't really shield him from hardship.
Absolutely. Even little details reveal a lot about where he came from. Like he talks about his father's accident. On the way to his wedding,
Oh.
the local ruler made his father stay late to fulfill some duties, and then rushing to make up for lost time, the coach overturned.
Wow.
His father arrived at the wedding bandaged up all over.
So even celebrations were overshadowed by this sense of duty and the influence of British authority. I can see how that could make someone feel obligated and aware of power.
Exact.
And speaking of duty, Gandhi got married really young, like 13 years old, to Kasturbai.
Yeah, an arranged marriage.
And he's honest about it,
Uh-huh.
admitting to being kind of consumed by lust early on
Mm-hmm.
and regretting being so possessive of Kasturbai.
Yeah. It's amazing how open he is about not treating her as an equal and regretting that he didn't educate her.
So his journey toward equality started right there in his own house.
Yeah. A reminder that even someone who becomes a symbol of social justice starts with their own personal growth. And Gandhi was clearly grappling with this from a young age.
He was. He also talks about those teenage experiments with eating meat and smoking. Pretty rebellious for someone with a strict vegetarian upbringing.
Right.
So is it just youthful indiscretion or something more?
I think it's that universal thing, wanting to fit in, especially as a teenager. But for Gandhi, it really created this conflict inside. Lying to his parents, it weighed on him, and he started questioning truth and deception.
It's like those early moral struggles. Planted the seeds for his commitment to honesty later on. And then there's that story about the brothel. He was pressured to go, but he felt paralyzed with fear. He says he couldn't go through with it, attributing that escape to divine intervention.
Wow. Divine intervention? Or was it just that strong moral compass he already had, developing even then?
A good question. Maybe both. Maybe he was already inclined to be moral and was relieved that something stopped him, whether it was fate or his own conscience. He also stole gold from his brother to help a friend repay a debt. But the guilt was so bad, he confessed to his father in writing, asking for forgiveness and punishment.
That really shows you something, that deep sense of responsibility, the need to be honest and make amends, like he was testing his limits, then seeking redemption.
And soon after that, his father died, while he was away with Kasturbai. And that guilt over not being there for his father, it adds another layer to his sense of duty and responsibility.
Yeah, all these early experiences, family honor, guilt over his failings, yearning for something more, they all weave together as he goes on this journey and deciding to study law in England. That was a big step,
Yeah.
challenging norms, a leap of faith.
To go to England in the late 1800s, that was a huge undertaking,
Like-
especially for someone like him. He had opposition from elders, financial issues, but he finally convinced his family to let him get a modern education.
It's interesting how different it was when he arrived in London. This young man from India, trying to fit into English society, wearing traditional clothing. He even tells this funny story about messing up a friend's top hat.
Oh, no.
You can picture it. The future Mahatma Gandhi, figuring out basic etiquette in a place so foreign to him.
I wonder if those awkward early days made him think about cultural differences later on and the importance of understanding different perspectives.
Maybe. And it's in London that he really gets into vegetarianism. He reads books arguing that great thinkers were all vegetarians. And he even tries to give a speech about it. But he gets too shy, and a friend has to read it for him.
That's such a contrast to the image of Gandhi as this powerful speaker inspiring millions.
Is it?
It's kind of encouraging. If he could overcome being that shy,
Yeah.
it shows how much anyone can grow.
Yeah, it reminds you that even the most influential people, they all started somewhere, made mistakes, learned from them. And there are these little things that make him seem so human. Like he talks about this nice old lady who helps him order from a French menu, and then he lies to her about being married
He did.
out of awkwardness.
Did she ever find out?
He actually wrote her a letter later,
Yeah.
confessing and saying he was sorry, and she forgave him. It shows how committed he was to being honest, even in small things, and the kindness he found in people.
It's good to remember that sometimes. Owning up to your mistakes can have a good outcome. So after 3 years in England, Gandhi goes back to India, a qualified lawyer, ready to make his mark. But things don't go to plan.
Not exact.
He's disappointed with being a lawyer.
He finds the procedures in court kind of morally conflicting, and he has trouble getting his practice going.
It's like he was already questioning the system, even though that's what he trained for. And there's that story where his brother tries to get him to use his connections to influence a British officer on a case. But Gandhi says no, he'd rather lose than do that.
That's a big statement.
It is.
It shows that for him, it wasn't just about winning. It was about doing the right thing. Even if he lost something, those are the beginnings of his ideas about nonviolent resistance, already there. And then comes his move to South Africa.
That's a turning point.
It was supposed to be a temporary legal job, but it ended up shaping his whole philosophy of satyagraha.
He experienced racial discrimination there firsthand.
Yeah.
And it changed him.
He went from wanting to be a successful lawyer to fighting for equality and justice. It all started with a simple train journey. That became this defining moment.
He had a first-class ticket, but they made him move to a third-class compartment. Because of his race, that must have been jarring, being forced out of a place you belong.
It was more than just uncomfortable. It was a real shock, showing how racial prejudice dehumanizes people. He later said this was a turning point when he really woke up to the prejudice. In South African society,
And got worse.
on another train, they threw him off because he wouldn't take off his turban,
His turban,
a symbol of his identity.
to be physically removed, just for wearing something that represents who you are. I can't imagine the humiliation and anger.
That's when he decided to fight for the rights of Indians in South Africa, challenging that system built on racial hierarchy, denying basic human dignity. And then when he gets back to Durban, a white mob attacks him, beats him, leaves him for dead.
You'd think that would make him furious.
You would.
But for Gandhi, it did the opposite. It just made him believe even more in nonviolent resistance.
Right.
He saw the mob as a symptom of something deeper, something that could only be cured with love and understanding.
And holding on to truth and justice, even when facing hate.
So this is where his journey as a leader really begins. Organizing the Indian community, giving legal advice, founding the Natal Indian Congress. But it's not just activism. He's experimenting in his personal life too, testing his ideals, even in his relationship with his wife Kasturbai.
Their journey together wasn't easy. His commitment to his ideals sometimes caused tension.
I can imagine.
It shows that even the most respected people are human, and relationships are complicated, and sometimes living your ideals comes at a cost.
One story really shows this tension. He made Kasturbai clean the chamber pot of a clerk from a lower caste. That seems harsh, even hypocritical. Considering his focus on equality,
Right.
what was he thinking?
Remember, Gandhi was totally against the caste system, which treated certain groups like they were the lowest in society. He believed everyone was inherently equal. And this act, even though it made Kasturbai uncomfortable, was meant to show that belief in his own home.
It seems like sometimes his pursuit of truth and justice caused problems with the people closest to him. That's a tough part of his legacy.
It is.
This clash between ideals and real relationships.
Absolutely. And he also decided to practice brahmacharya, celibacy. He saw it as a way to control himself and grow spiritually.
Another example of him pushing himself. To reach a higher level, it seems like he was always testing himself. Like those personal experiments were just as important
Yeah.
as his activism.
His personal and public life were connected. He believed that real change started with the individual, becoming a better person, striving to be moral.
And there's that story about him giving up salt and pulses for a whole year to prove how committed he was to self-denial. When Kasturbai questioned him,
He was so dedicated to proving a point, pushing himself to the limit. It's part of what makes him so interesting, that mix of idealism and practicality, that total commitment to his own path.
so he's leading this social justice movement, experimenting with communal living at the Phoenix settlement, encouraging people of different faiths to talk to each other, even running a school and developing his own ideas about education, All of this would lead to his return to India, where he becomes a leader in the independence movement.
He took all the lessons he learned in South Africa with him. His commitment to satyagraha was tested and refined, and he was ready to use it for the biggest challenge yet, freeing India from British rule. It's amazing how his experiences in South Africa really got him ready for that huge task, leading India's independence movement.
He came back to India in 1915, after more than 2 decades in South Africa. But it wasn't just going home. It was the start of something new, where he'd use satyagraha on a national scale.
India is so different from South Africa, though. The problems were more complicated, the stakes were higher, but Gandhi had learned to be an organizer, a strategist, a leader, and he was ready to change his approach for this new situation.
He spent the first few years traveling around, meeting political people, learning about the social and political scene. Like he was gathering information, feeling out the mood of the nation.
He was always watching and trying to understand the details of the situation, what people wanted and needed, and pretty soon he found an issue where he could put his philosophy into action and show the power of satyagraha in India.
That's where Champaran comes in.
Right? In 1917, he got a letter from a peasant in Bihar describing how badly the indigo farmers were being treated by British planters.
They were forced to grow indigo on part of their land, with barely any payment, stuck in poverty and debt.
Exactly. It was a small example of that bigger struggle against British colonialism.
A system that was meant to help the British at the expense of Indians.
Yeah. And Gandhi saw it as his duty to do something, to fight for the people who were suffering and challenge how unfair colonial rule was.
So he went to Champaran, a remote rural area, and looked into it, talking to farmers, hearing their stories, carefully documenting their problems, and building a case against those planters. He was using his legal skills to fight for justice.
But it was more than just a legal fight.
It was
a social and political movement, empowering the farmers to stand up for themselves, to resist injustice peacefully, showing them they had a voice, and that working together, they could change things.
That's where his leadership is so special. He wasn't just a lawyer or a politician. He was a social reformer, a spiritual leader who really connected with people.
Yeah.
Who really connected with people.
And made them believe they could make a difference.
It's interesting how he combined those things. Organizing protests, leading marches, negotiating with authorities, all while telling people to be self-reliant, morally good, and live simply. He wore homespun clothes and wanted others to do the same, rejecting British culture and embracing Indian traditions.
He lived what he believed, and that made him a powerful symbol. And the Champaran Satyagraha worked. The British felt the pressure and agreed to investigate the planters. It was a small win, but it affected all of India. It showed the power of satyagraha, inspired others to fight for justice, and marked Gandhi's arrival as a national leader.
It changed things for him and for the independence movement. It showed that you could fight the British Empire without violence, and it brought Indians together.
And he kept going. In 1918, he took up the cause of textile workers in Ahmedabad, who were striking for better pay. Economic justice was important to him, too.
Definitely. He understood the working class and saw that their exploitation was connected to colonialism. He believed that real self-rule, Swaraj, couldn't happen without economic independence and giving regular people the power to create a fair society.
What he did in Ahmedabad was clever. He didn't just say he supported the strike. He joined the workers, lived with them, and experienced their struggles, and then he fasted, putting himself on the line for their cause.
Being willing to suffer with the people he was fighting for, that was really powerful. It showed how committed he was and made his followers trust him even more.
The strike worked. The mill owners gave in to the pressure. From the workers and Gandhi's strong moral stand, they agreed to better pay and working conditions.
Another win for Satyagraha, showing its power and making Gandhi's reputation as a leader even stronger. And then there was the Kheda Satyagraha, a campaign against unfair taxes. During a drought, farmers were barely surviving. Their crops had failed, but the British still wanted them to pay full taxes.
This really shows Gandhi's compassion and his willingness to challenge the most powerful people. For those who are most vulnerable, he saw how wrong it was to demand money from people who were starving. It went against his belief that powerful people have a responsibility to take care of the weak and the suffering.
He traveled to Kheda, met with the farmers, and saw the situation. He knew the taxes were wrong and launched a satyagraha, telling the farmers not to pay.
That was bold, directly challenging the British government.
It was.
But Gandhi knew they were morally right. They were fighting for the farmers to survive and for fair government.
And he wasn't afraid to use symbolic actions to get people's attention. and show how ridiculous the situation was. He encouraged them to remove onion crops from a field that the authorities had wrongly taken.
That was smart. It was.
Nonviolent, symbolic, and it caught people's attention. The image of farmers being punished for trying to live while being denied basic food, that resonated with people all over India.
And it led to the arrest of one of Gandhi's close friends, Mohanlal Pandya, the onion thief.
People who resisted British rule wore their imprisonment like a badge of honor.
They did.
It showed their bravery and their dedication. And in the end, the Kheda Satyagraha worked. The British had to give in to pressure from the farmers, the public, and even some of their own people. They agreed to stop collecting taxes until the drought was over. Another win for Satyagraha, proving it could work against injustice. Gandhi was showing that nonviolent resistance could get real results. But all of this was happening during World War I, which created a tricky situation for Gandhi. He believed in nonviolence, but he also felt loyal to the British and knew that if India helped in the war, it might bring some benefits.
It's a tough choice.
It was.
He encouraged Indians to join the army, hoping that it would earn them respect and rights. Within the empire, it was a risk, trying to deal with a complicated situation.
But he never gave up on his ultimate goal. Swaraj, complete self-rule for India. He was working within the system while also challenging it.
He was a brilliant strategist, using everything he could to move India towards independence, and he became more and more influential in the Indian National Congress. He was a powerful voice, arguing for unity, self-reliance, and a vision of India without British control.
His message was reaching people, and the stage was set for the next part of his incredible journey, a part that would see him lead one of the most important movements in history.
Things really start to change in the 1920s. In India's fight for independence, it's like all the work Gandhi did before, those early campaigns, becoming more influential. It all comes together into this big movement.
And his idea of satyagraha is really tested on a national level. Mass movements, civil disobedience, a direct challenge to the British Empire, and they weren't going to give up easily.
Not at all.
And it all starts to escalate with the Rowlatt Act in 1919. These laws gave the British so much power to stop anyone who disagreed with them, arrest people without a trial, basically crushing any opposition before it could even start.
It made people furious across India. They saw it as a direct attack on their freedom, a betrayal. After they'd been given some small reforms, it was like adding fuel to the fire that had been burning for years.
And Gandhi saw this and called for a nationwide hurdle, a general strike and protest, to show everyone was against the Rowlatt Act.
That's where you see his amazing ability to get people moving. He understood how much people wanted freedom, how much injustice there was, and he turned it into this unified resistance.
Millions of people joined in. Shops closed. Businesses stopped. Huge demonstrations everywhere. It's hard to imagine all that energy and hope.
It must have been incredible.
But the British were scared of losing control, so they cracked down.
They did.
They shot at unarmed crowds, arrested thousands.
They really underestimated the power of the movement and how angry people were.
And then there was the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, April 13th, 1919. British troops fired on a peaceful group, unarmed civilians in Amritsar. Hundreds died, women, children.
That was a turning point, a horrible example of what the colonial government would do. To stay in power, the whole world was shocked, and it started a wave of anger that couldn't be ignored.
For Gandhi, it was a moment of truth. He realized that asking nicely wouldn't get them independence. The British would use any force necessary
To protect themselves.
It made him rethink his strategy. India needed to do more than symbolic protests. They needed to directly resist, strike at the heart of British rule.
And that's what led to the non-cooperation movement in 1920, a completely different approach.
He called for a total boycott of British goods, institutions, services, basically trying to paralyze the colonial administration.
Millions of Indians listened. Schools and colleges emptied. No one went to court. Bonfires of British cloth everywhere. The movement grew so fast, bringing people together like never before.
The whole nation was united.
In defiance.
But the non-cooperation movement, as strong as it was, also showed how hard it was to keep things non-violent on such a large scale.
The British did what they always did. Repression. Arresting thousands of activists, including Gandhi. And some protests turned violent, clashes with police, more tension between communities.
That really bothered Gandhi. He knew that violence, even if it was in response to something, would hurt the movement's moral standing and help the British.
It shows how practical he was.
In 1922, Gandhi made the tough decision to stop the non-cooperation movement. He realized that people weren't ready. for that kind of long-term nonviolent resistance. Not on that scale.
So it wasn't a defeat, more like a strategic retreat, realizing they needed to prepare more, be more disciplined, to reach their goal.
But the fight continued. And Gandhi, always trying new things, looked for new ways to challenge British rule.
And in the 1930s, he started the Salt Satyagraha, maybe the most famous campaign of the whole movement.
He chose salt, something everyone needs, as a symbol against the British salt tax.
That was brilliant.
It was.
Salt was something everyone understood. By fighting the salt tax, Gandhi was showing how unfair and cruel British policies were, even to the poorest people.
It got the world's attention. Gandhi and his followers marched to the sea and broke the law by making salt from seawater. The simple act. But it sparked disobedience all over India.
Millions joined.
And the British reacted with violence, arresting tens of thousands, including Gandhi. But it was too late. The Salt Satyagraha changed everything. It showed how strong the movement was.
And Gandhi never gave up on nonviolence, telling his people to stay disciplined, respond to violence with love, and endure suffering without fighting back. It's amazing how much he believed in the power of truth and nonviolence to overcome even the worst oppression.
And in the end, Gandhi's efforts, and the efforts of so many others, led to India's independence in 1947. A victory, showing the power of peaceful resistance. But it was also a time of sadness.
The partition of India and Pakistan, such a painful and violent separation, so much violence and displacement, something Gandhi really tried to stop.
And then just a few months later, Gandhi was assassinated, a victim of the very hate and violence he'd spent his life fighting.
Such a sad end to an amazing life, a life of struggle, sacrifice, and a commitment to truth and justice.
But his legacy lives on.
It does.
Gandhi showed us that even impossible dreams can come true with hard work, belief, and nonviolent resistance.
He showed us that real change means changing ourselves, questioning our own beliefs, living our ideals, and sacrificing for something bigger.
And he left us with Satyagraha, a powerful way to change society that still inspires people around the world to fight for what's right.
Gandhi's life showed that one person can make a difference, challenge injustice, and give people hope.
It's been a journey, exploring Gandhi's life in his own words. He was more than just a political leader. He was a complex person who fought his own flaws, always experimented, and dedicated himself to truth, justice, and a better world.
His story has so much for us to think about. What did you find most interesting? How do his struggles and successes connect with your own life and the problems we face today? These are the questions I hope you keep thinking about as you learn more about Gandhi's life and legacy.